speak loudly, we can turn the microphone level down.
Yes, I could adjust that.
Well, I have a big mouth, so at least that's what my wife says. 40 years.
40 years.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's a long time.
It's a long time. And just clip that anywhere, put in your pocket, do whatever you want with it. And before you put it in your pocket, I'm going to have you push that top button so you're unmuted. So it's muted right now. There you go. So hot mic.
Is that's on? It is. Great. Okay. Well, it's 3:30, so let's get going. Today, our seminar speaker for the last colloquium of the quarter is Scott Montgomery. Scott's over from the Jackson School, so he's one of us here at UW. But he's also one of us because he's affiliate in the Earth and Space Sciences affiliate faculty. So that connection, I guess, has been going for quite some time now. I don't remember when I first met Scott, but I do remember that I've asked him on numerous occasions to come in and speak in my economic geology class whenever I have to say anything about fossil fuel geology. I defer to Scott. So as that says, Scott's a former petroleum geologist, but that's it's a very significant part of his career. But it's one of several things that he has done. It turns out his original degree is a BA in English from Knox College. It was only when he went to Cornell for his master's that he became a geologist, and then spent time working particularly on aspects of basin analysis in the 1990s, sort of foreshadowing the fracking boom that made America the sort of energy-independent nation that it is now. And Scott was one of the people who was knowledgeable about that before it happened. The other thing to say about Scott, I guess, is that he's a prolific author. I think, did you say 12 or 14 books?
14.
14 books. So not just treatises on geology and so forth, but lots of books about history and philosophy of science, science writing, and in particular, and relevant to his talk today, lots of work on the geopolitics of energy, and going from fossil fuels to uranium as well. Anyway, please welcome Scott. His title today is War and the Energy Transition. What are the impacts and what do they mean? So, Scott Montgomery.
Thank you very much. Perhaps you should hold your applause till the end. You may want to express your appreciation in a different way. I want to talk tonight, or this afternoon, this evening, about some energy myths to set a background for talking about the wars that are ongoing. As I will describe them, they are major wars, the war in Ukraine, and certainly, as you are all aware, the war in the Persian Gulf. These are both global in the sense of their impacts, not least in the energy domain. And when I say that, I mean the entire energy domain. I mean not just oil and gas, though those are primary in a lot of people's minds. But it also affects the world trade of technologies, minerals, and many things that affect food as well. I'll be focusing on the energy, and I'll probably be talking more about oil and gas than the others. But I'll give you a reason why I do that. But first, let's start with a few myths. Oh. Sorry, I didn't want you to miss him. You know, he's a very important companion in the energy world, as I'll try and make clear. So the first myth I'd like to talk about is the one that perhaps you encounter a great deal in our prestige media or perhaps online in the social media side of things. You can be forgiven immediately for coming under the spell of this particular myth. I want you to look at this image. This is reality. I show this to each one of my classes that I teach about energy. This is the very first thing I show them. And I've learned that it is important for them to look at it and to understand what it says. What it says is that oil, gas, and coal run the world. And they very much do. They haven't stopped doing this. You'll notice that coal is plateauing out, particularly since about 2012. But oil and particularly gas, are definitely still increasing. Renewables, or let's call it, I think this is a better term actually to use, non-carbon energy. If we are concerned about climate change, we are really concerned about the difference between carbon energy and non-carbon energy. And I think that gets us away from sort of the moral hygiene world of clean and dirty. As an engineer, electrical engineer once told me, there are no dirty electrons. And I trust what she says. You'll also notice that traditional biomass is still very much a thing. In fact, it's a thing for several billion people. It doesn't mean that they lack entirely from natural fuels, but it does mean that they rely significantly on vegetal matter, animal waste, firewood, and biomass from nature. But you'll notice that we see hydropower, wind, solar, other renewables, which would definitely include geothermal, and then modern biofuels. Now, if the further back we go, obviously the smaller they are. They are not a huge part of global energy consumption at this point. They are a very rapidly growing part of electricity production. But power generation right now is only about 20 to 25% of total energy production. So what you're looking at here has a lot to do with industry, a lot to do with transport still at this moment, a fair bit to do with residential use around the world, and commerce as well. This is very important to keep in mind. A sense of reality is essential. And it's especially important when we are talking about the wars that are ongoing now, when there are global impacts. Now, the non-carbon sector, if we can call it that, is real, it is mainstream, it is not going away, it is going to grow. It'll grow not just for policy reasons, but because A large portion of it is now profitable. That is a major accomplishment particularly for solar and wind, but also hopefully, and I know you'll share this with me, geothermal, which has been the poor child on the church step for a long time, and deserves a bit more attention. It has taken about $4.5 trillion of investment to get solar and wind in particular where it is now. Now it is mainstream. That was expensive to get there, but it shouldn't be a surprise. And I will make this point in some other ways. Oil and gas, particularly if we're talking about the wealthy countries, is not just important or essential, it is saturating and penetrative of modern life. I will make a point about that, and I will bring it home. I don't do this to depress you, to upset you. I do this to communicate what is at this particular time, and probably for a few more decades yet. We'll see. Predicting the future is not something I'm used to doing, unless I'm making a joke or expressing my own humility. So this is another myth, that advanced nations are the most important source of energy demand and the most energy consumers. And this 200-year period, when that was the case, when the West plus Japan, essentially ran the global energy systems. That period is over. It's been over since the great financial crisis, which accelerated it a little bit. But we are no longer in charge. It's really what other parts of the world decide to do, the sources that they decide to make use of, to import, to export, and the sources that they are willing to develop technologically that matter, not what we decide here. This is very important. Also another key fact. And going forward, you also notice that the OECD, which is a club of rich countries, as The Economist calls it, are actually declining overall in emissions, whereas the rest of the world is really taking over the future. I'll introduce you to China very soon. Don't worry about that. Now, a third myth is that oil is no longer important anymore and it can be replaced, particularly by EVs. Okay, this is another idea or sort of an implied future. What I'm showing you on this graph, this is actually from the International Energy Agency, the IEA, is what is called the global oil intensity of GDP, and you can see the definition. In this case, it's European, right? Liters of oil consumed per $1,000 of GDP output. So intensity, same measurement basically as carbon intensity. And you can see that this has just come down and down and down. And it does reflect a reality that advanced countries particularly, but other emerging economies have relied less and less and less on oil for all the uses that we used to apply it to. So in the 1970s, we were still using oil for more than 50% of all of our energy use. We were using it for heating, for cooking, for industry, for transportation, and for power generation. All of these different sectors were powered by oil. It was talked about as a miracle fuel because it's not one substance like water or alcohol. It is actually thousands of separate fractions of hydrocarbons. And these can be separated by fractional distillation, recombined into special fuels, and refined even more after that by additions of certain other chemicals. But the world as we have created it in terms of transport, and when we think for a moment, if we go all the way from maybe a leaf blower all the way up to the B-52 and all the different vehicles in between, they pretty much all run up till now on petroleum fuels. This includes the militaries, to be sure, which have a great variety of vehicles. So, though we depend on oil a lot less than we used to, now we use it mainly for transport and a few other things in some portions of industry. It has nonetheless become more penetrative in society. One thing I'd like to show you also is a history of oil consumption by different parts of the world. So we are looking at, this is the Asia Pacific here, and its growth since the 90s. This is North America. Notice that North America used it quite a bit more in the second energy crisis, and then it really peaked back here in about 2008 to 2010. Europe is similar. If we go back again into the 70s, Europe used a lot more, and then it peaked also at about the same period of time. The CIS, which is the Commonwealth of Independent States, or the former Soviet Union, was definitely much more oil dependent when it was the Soviet Union. And then we see the Middle East and Latin America and then Africa. The key point to this graph is COVID. This is when transportation demand, as you remember, I think a fair number of you, declined very suddenly and to a great degree. The point I would make here is that it just bounced back. There was great hope at the time that this would be taken advantage of to move away from oil and to embrace EVs and solar and wind in particular, but also an expanse in nuclear and other forms of non-carbon energy. That did not happen. And in a way, it's almost common sense when you begin to think about the industries that exist to make use of these fuels, fuels from petroleum, and the number of people that work in them, the countries that depend upon them, and the industries and the militaries also. They were not going to change overnight. You know, we're talking actually about hundreds of millions of people, and we were definitely talking about power in many countries. OPEC was not going to disappear. Russia was not going to give up being an energy superpower. Texas was not going to secede from the Union and float away, and so on. So what you're seeing is that there's an enormous amount of momentum in the use of these fuels. There is an immense set of industries and systems that exist today that did not exist in the 1970s at this scale to continue the use of these fuels. And so just that little dip and then the jump back up tells us an awful lot about how difficult it will be to change the world away from these fuels. Okay, now, this is a very short list of the things that oil produces. If I were to take one of you, if this were sort of a magic show or a real performance, I would take one of you up. And if it were a female, I would ask if you used makeup, hair products, toothpaste. Did you take any medicines? That would be a start. You wear glasses. You use a computer. What about the clothes? Do you have any elastic things in your clothes? Are your clothes cotton, linen, or wool? Because if they're anything else, they're a petroleum product. The chances are very high. And that's a beginning. And then I would take you through your day. How do you move around? We could go through the rest of your clothes, actually. Shoes, pants, etc. But then we would go around and follow you for the day. We would go into each room, a room like this, and we would look around at all the things that come from oil. We would go to lunch and look at the plates and the various decor that exists there, and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, it gets old, I know. It does, but the point is we live in a sea of oil. Each one of us. We are contributors to climate change if we exist in a modern society. The only way you don't is if you take the model of Ted Kaczynski and build a cabin in the Montana and go completely off the grid, except for blowing people up. Well, never mind. Anyway, you get the point. It can be a little bit overwhelming to actually go through even an hour or even half an hour and realize how saturating petroleum really is. This is fairly new. It really has a lot to do with organic geochemistry, the discoveries of new types of plastics, but many other things as well. And then this point that I always come back to, oil powers every military in the world. That is a national security issue for every country that has a military, and particularly for countries that have rivals. And there are not many countries who don't have rivals, especially these days. So this is going to be difficult to change. It is beginning to change. China's military is beginning to electrify its non-tactical vehicles, and there are thousands of them. The U.S. has a plan for that as well. The Europeans are building up their militaries now, thanks to a certain encouragement they've gotten from the White House. They are going to be building electric vehicles for non-tactical and then soon tactical vehicles as well. It's not going to work very well very soon in ships or in aircraft, so there will be limits for a while, but it can make a difference. It can definitely make militaries not the national security concern with regard to oil that they are now, but that will take time for sure. Okay. So there is a China paradox. So, you see, I told you I would get to China. You can't talk about energy or emissions without knocking on China's door. So there's a China paradox. And I wrote an article recently about this for Forbes, of all places. But people with money should know this, right? And part of this paradox is that China is said to be leading the green revolution in energy, right? You've all heard this, am I right? Solar and wind, the largest exporter of those by far, selling them at cheaper prices than other companies, Western companies. Put a lot of companies out of business, Japan, South Korea, and India, and the U.S., but they've come back, some of them. But then there's another China, isn't there? There's this China. The same China is burning more coal and producing more emissions than all the wealthy countries put together, including the U.S. This is not a small gap. It is immense. Very important to keep in mind, because China's decisions about its energy, they have an instant world impact. But I do want to hold out something that China has done very successfully, and unfortunately the U.S. has made a decision to remain in the past, and it seems likely to give up an industry that used to employ 1 out of 7 people. So on the far left, you can see this is China's share of electric vehicles in its own country, which has rapidly increased, but also in Western Europe. These are hybrids, by the way, down here. In India, it's rising very rapidly, though the Indian government has some import restrictions. It wants its own industry to grow, and then in Japan as well. I don't put the U.S. up here. Why? Because we don't import any Chinese vehicles. Thank you very much. We might sneak a few over the border from Mexico, because BYD and Geely are building factories there, but you'll have nobody here who knows how to repair them. And we might actually have those nasty Canadians, have a factory there too. But no, we are stalwart, 100% tariff against any Chinese vehicles coming in. If China wants to establish a factory here, we'll see. But while the rest of the world moves on with the revolution, we'll kind of stay here. So your vote counts. Be sure to vote when it's time and often, as Mayor Daley once said of Chicago. Okay. So this is the emissions picture, and there you see China. But China's not just the only thing to look at here. We see that Europe and the U.S. actually are declining in emissions fairly rapidly, though not as rapidly as I think we would like necessarily. But you'll also see that India is rising very quickly as well. Why? Because they both use a lot of coal. Why do they use a lot of coal? Because they have it. That is their main domestic energy resource. And they have a lot of it. The U.S. has the most, by far. In fact, Wyoming alone has as much coal as all of China does. But that's another story, a geological story. But they are using that. They are using domestic resources because they are concerned about their energy security. This is a very powerful idea. It is also an idea that has been intensified by the war in Iran. And that's one of the themes I'd like to emphasize. This is very important as well. These are upper middle income countries. So we are talking about countries like Turkey, Brazil, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Nigeria, and a fair number of others. These are the countries that are rapidly expanding economically. They are using a lot more oil and gas than they did before. If they have coal, they're using that. Indonesia and Vietnam and Turkey are all examples of that. So they have surpassed the wealthy countries who are pursuing solar, wind, renewables, and now nuclear as well. So pursuing the non-carbon domain, both for policy reasons and also for economic reasons, profit reasons. The lower middle income countries, and here we are talking about India, Pakistan, South Asia as a whole, a fair portion of Africa, and some in Southeast Asia, and a significant portion of Latin America. So they are in an earlier stage of these countries, so we can kind of turn it back about a decade, about 2 decades, 3 decades. And they are pursuing the same trajectory as the upper middle income countries now. So this is the state of the world in terms of emissions. Now, okay, the energy transition. You may believe you know what it is. In fact, there are 4 different theories about what an energy transition is, and I'm not going to tell you about them because they are mostly political science and historical theories. They aren't really theories about energy itself. But I do want to point out that one of the views that is most prevalent is this one, that we are going to turn a page. We are going to get rid of fossil fuels, and we are going to embrace solar and wind most of all. These days, we're going to perhaps embrace some other things as well, but the idea is that the past is going to be gone. We are going to open a different book even, or go to a different library. And this is the view. Actually, it's an idea. It's very important to think about what this means, that this can be achieved very rapidly and totally. And these are not clearly possible. They are plausible, but that does not make them possible at the same time. Now, I want to give you some ideas about the different versions of the energy transition that are being argued by different, they each have their partisan groups, and each of these groups can argue with a great deal of passion and perhaps be convincing. But there are more than one. This is the one we hear about the most. Not just wind and solar, but battery storage in particular. California is a very good example of that. They have a massive solar capability that they use every day for about 8 hours, and then it goes away. But they use storage and imports from other states. They do have some natural gas. They have wind. They have hydropower, and then they have nuclear power in one nuclear plant. But then there is this side. Why focus on just 2? Why not open it up to all the renewable energy sources, some of which already exist in considerable scale, like hydro, and some of which are just beginning with new technologies like geothermal, and then, of course, storage added to this. So this is argued very strongly as well. But then there is this idea, renewables and hydrogen. Hydrogen serving the role both of storage and of actual production. This has been mainly discussed in terms of electrolysis of water, of course, powered by renewables. But now there is a movement to identify areas on the globe where natural hydrogen is actually escaping. So there are seeps or vents of hydrogen. There are actually hundreds of them in the globe. It's quite interesting chemically. Ophiolites are a general source of this. So this is a new movement within the hydrogen system. Another growing view of what the energy transition should be or must be or will be is to put renewables and nuclear together, and not just fission, the next generation, but also fusion. In the future, fusion is not a half century away, as it always has been in the past. Yet another view is renewables, nuclear, and low-emitting and non-particulate emitting natural gas. This is argued very strongly in some countries. Canada, to a certain degree, portions of the U.S., where natural gas is produced and renewables are major industries. Texas is definitely one of those. And then there is, well, all of the above. These are all different positions of the energy transition. Which is right? Yeah, well, no one knows. And we can call these energy culture wars because they are. When I ask what are all these versions about, they are about different visions of society in the future. Very different organizations of society to use these different energy sources. If you use solar and wind and storage, you will have a decentralized world. Because solar and wind, they do need large amounts of land to generate enough power to, say, power a city. So the approach would be to actually make a number of smaller solar farms and wind farms. So that would be a very different energy kind of system. Right now we have a more centralized type. If you were to talk about renewables, nuclear, and fossil fuels, that would be similar to the system we have now. Would not necessarily be decentralized, though that would be an option. But you could still have very large centralized generation of energy. And you would still make use of oil and gas, though perhaps at a declining level over time. These are, again, very distinct social visions, and that's one of the reasons I think that people argue so adamantly about in their favor or against the others. But in terms of an actual energy transition, there is no consensus about what it is yet. And to be frank with you, I'm not sure that there will be. The UN has no official definition. The IPCC has no official definition. When China talks about green energy, they include natural gas. So it's very much a complex area and one that is, I think, fought over quite a bit. All right, so let's talk a little bit about war. This, I promise it won't be happy, but it will be informing. So there, as I mentioned before, there are two major wars. And when I talk about Russia and Ukraine, I also add Europe there. Because Europe was part of it very early on, just before the Russian invasion in February of 2022. And we'll talk about that. And then the U.S., Iran, Israel is involved in that to a certain degree, but in terms of closure or double closure of the Strait of Hormuz now, with both the Iranian blockade or threat and then the U.S. blockade, it's really those two countries that could open up the strait. Now, in the fall of 2021, Russia began an operation. It began, and this was done through the state natural gas company, Gazprom. It was a move to slowly cut the amount of gas that Europe was getting as it went into a cold winter. So this started around September. It got worse in November. The European countries complained. Gazprom gave a variety of explanations, all of them fairly evasive or clearly untrue, that it didn't have enough in storage. And so Europe got very anxious, and then more of the gas was cut off. And it turned out later that this was actually a test or a threat, both actually, that Russia was trying to create a great deal of anxiety, fear, confusion therefore a lack of unity before it invaded Ukraine, because it knew that Europe, that the EU, and the European side of NATO would respond. And so this was a way to kind of forestall a unified response to its invasion of Ukraine, which was supposed to only take about 2 weeks, right? You remember that. They would march their way into Kyiv, eliminate all of the existing government. And when I mean eliminate, I mean eliminate. And it didn't quite happen that way, but this is where the war began, not between Russia and Ukraine, but between Russia and Europe. This was using energy as a hard power weapon. To a certain degree, it worked. Europeans were very confused. They did not know what was happening or why. They were very anxious because it was a cold winter, and they used natural gas, especially for heating. So it was also a threat. Now we know that this would be the cost of interfering with Russia. It would turn off the gas. And Europe had spent more than a decade, actually closer to 20 years, increasing its imports from Russia. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel was a big proponent of this. There were several very large pipelines built under the Baltic Sea from Russia into Germany, called the Nord Stream 1 and the Nord Stream 2. The Nord Stream 1 was active and had been active since 2011 when it was completed, and Nord Stream 2 was just finished in 2022, but was never used for other reasons after the invasion. Europe was dependent for 40 to 50% of its natural gas on Russia. It had forgotten the most basic geopolitical law of dependence: spread your risk. I mean, you do this if you invest in stocks, unless, of course, you put your money all in NVIDIA. And then you wouldn't be sitting here. You'd have bought an island somewhere in the Balearics or somewhere. And you'd know the names of all these and social security numbers of all these famous people. But in any case, that didn't happen. So Europe had this power, but it had, as a client of Russia, but it did not pay attention to its dependence. It thought that Russia could not give up Europe's dependence on it. But Putin didn't do this with oil. Why not? Because that's where the big source of money is. That's what runs the Russian economy, especially these days when all the Western companies have left. Russia is a natural resource state, and oil and gas and the fuels that are generated from them are really what power its war machine at this point. So Putin wasn't going to mess around with that, and it figured that Europe couldn't survive without its natural gas. In any case, the invasion proceeded, and until 2024, it was a one-sided war. And we heard a great deal about the front and all the deaths and the casualties of the front. But the upper figure here shows you that the actual attacks on Ukraine were not focused only in the Russian-occupied areas, the Donetsk, especially through here, but this is Kyiv. This is a heavy steel production area through here, and you can see that the attacks were all over. They were focused on the grid system, on power plants, on transmission towers, on substations, transformers, and other aspects that were part of Ukraine's grid system. This was Russia's definite plan. Reduce the country to where it could not have a working economy, and it would make the people demoralized and ready to give up. They did not, though demoralized is probably somewhat accurate. But in 2024, Ukraine started to turn the tables. This is when, this is a slide showing where the 5 different nuclear plants are in Ukraine, and Russia attacked every one of them, including Chernobyl, at the very top, and put a hole in the top of the great cement shield that has been put over the exploded Chernobyl reactor. Zaporizhzhia, down here with the circle around it, is the biggest nuclear facility in Europe. It has 6 large reactors, all built by the Russians. And it was actually a staging area for Russian attacks. They invaded it, they pushed out the Ukrainians, they kept the Ukrainian operators of the system. All of the reactors were shut down and in what is called cold storage. And so there was no problem of radiation leakage for that. There was a spent fuel pool that could have generated a fair bit of radiation had it been struck by bombs, but that didn't happen. Russia took it over and began to use artillery from around the power plant, knowing that Ukraine would not attack in return. And then Russia began building cables to take electricity generated by Zaporizhzhia back across the border to power Russia itself. That was cut off by the Ukrainians and their artillery and their drones. So starting in about 2024, Ukraine began to launch systematic drone attacks on Russian refineries, attacking its oil infrastructure. Once you damage a refinery and reduce it so that it is no longer operational, you have to stop the production of oil that goes to that. And that would cut down on Russia's oil capabilities, its exports, and therefore the money for its war machine. Ukraine has been more than successful at doing this. This is a map showing where it has struck. These are all refinery or pipeline areas that relate to its oil infrastructure, which is enormous. And Ukraine has become more and more systematic about its attacks, more successful, and more damaging. And Russia's total oil production has decreased by about 20% from 2024 till today. And then Europe strikes back. What does Europe do? It cuts off Russian gas and cuts off a large portion, the majority portion of its imports of oil from Russia. So suddenly Russia loses its largest customer by far. There was always a codependence between these two, Europe or the EU countries and Russia. But Europe made the decision to not lie down, which it had done in 2014, but do something about it. They didn't cut it off entirely. It couldn't all be replaced. But they did a majority. This shows the oil amount. This was the use of energy as a hard power weapon against an attacker. So we are seeing a pattern to a certain degree. Now, what about Iran and the Hormuz crisis? I'm going to go over this pretty quickly. This was the captain of a Thai cargo ship. That's not a tanker, that's a heavy cargo ship that was struck by Iranian drones as they tried to transit the Hormuz Straits. I did want to have some geology in here, so I wanted to very basically show some cool things. The Zagros Mountains are one of the most fabulous places for any structural geologist like myself to go and look, because there's very little vegetation and the anticlines are just emerging out of the sand. And there are canyons right through them, and you can see the folds as beautifully exposed, or I would say more beautifully exposed than almost anywhere in the western U.S. They have the actual Hormuz Strait here is a major fault between the suture. This is the large Zagros thrust, and then the Makan subduction zone here, and the Zagros continue all the way up into Iraq. These are some anticlines, and here you see salt that is diapyrically breaking through the top of the anticline and flowing out into the desert valley. There's another one here, and there's one emerging here. The salt creates enormous amounts of lubricant for the thrusts that exist. It's Cambrian salt, so it really comes from a depth. Anyway, what I wanted to say briefly is that the Persian Gulf has so much oil and gas because it is a collision zone. It has a very active fold and thrust belt, but the Arabian plate, you guys know, right? The Arabian plate is colliding with Eurasia here. And the Persian Gulf is kind of like a little pond in the depression between the rising fold and thrust belt. But the Arabian plate was for hundreds of millions of years very quiescent, place where large limestone platforms formed. There were periods of regression when shales, organic rich shales, were deposited there. But there's tremendous continuity among within the stratigraphy. And there are porosity zones within the limestones and the sandstones that go for hundreds of miles, very continuous, and therefore very wonderful reservoirs for oil and gas. The collision has caused Precambrian early rift faults to activate, reactivate, and have lifted them up vertically and made very gentle domes. Again, tens of miles across and many tens of miles long. These are enormous domes that became perfect reservoirs for the migration of oil and gas from deeper levels. It's not an accident that the Persian Gulf has so much oil and gas. It really was, in some ways, an ideal situation. Okay, so that's a geology. And now, the Strait of Hormuz is closed. This was 20% of global LNG and also 20 million barrels of oil and gas. That's 20% of the global trade, or global production, I should say. The world produces about 104 million barrels a day. That's a lot of fluid. So this is what was shut off. These are the countries that were immediately involved that had to deal with this on a very short-term basis: China, South Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia, India, Pakistan also, Europe to a certain degree, the U.S. To an insignificant degree. So a fair portion of Asia was directly affected. China had a reserve. It has a strategic oil reserve of originally 1.2 billion barrels, twice the size of the maximum of the U.S. strategic reserves. South Korea had about 200 days worth, and Japan about 240 days. Southeast Asia had about 2 weeks worth. And they've had to put in play emergency measures now for 2 months. India had about 4 weeks. Europe had a bit more. So this has had a true global impact, both on the supply of oil, but on the politics of oil as well. One of the reasons for that is that Iran did attack all of its neighbors. Not a very nice thing to do. It attacked Iraq here in Basra. It certainly attacked Saudi Arabia in a number of places. Jubail, the major port, it destroyed Qatar's natural gas export, the LNG export, and it continuously attacked the United Arab Emirates, which Iran sees as a total traitor of the region because it established relations formally with Israel and has been playing very nice with Europe and the U.S. There are 2 pipelines out of the Persian Gulf. There is this one to Yanbu. It carries about 7 million barrels a day, which is significant, but it does not take care of the 20 million that were lost. The UAE has a little bit of a pipeline here that avoids the blockade from Iran, but now has the problem with the Trump blockade. The proposals are to build a new pipeline. This is an old one that used to run through Jordan, Syria, and into Israel. This is an old one that no longer was used. It was never going to survive that part of the Middle East. It was attacked a number of times. But now there is talk to build a pipeline all the way up through Syria into the eastern Mediterranean. I don't know how soon they will do that, but there are already pipelines in the desert. Okay, now, there have been 2 responses to this crisis. It is the largest oil crisis in history, without a doubt. And there have been 2 responses to it. And one of them is that it is an incentive to advance non-carbon energy. Now is the time. You must seize it. Increase solar and wind, particularly, but other non-carbon sources as well. But you won't be surprised that there is another response from the oil-producing countries. It's not just the U.S. There are dozens of others, and they've all tried to increase production because of the increased prices. So you're having these 2 going on at the same time. This is the complexity of the world that we live in. The claims that now is the time to try and replace fossil fuels are really desperate in a way. That's how they are being seen by most energy experts and analysts at this time. Okay. But they make sense. Now, we come back to China, because China imports a very large amount of oil from that area. China is, as you know, perhaps, making claim to the South China Sea. It is a claim of offshore territory. And one of the main reasons is not oil and gas in the sea or fishery resources. It is security aimed. China has what is called the Malacca Syndrome. The Malacca Straits are the, and here, yeah, we are here, and that's right past Singapore into the South China Sea. There is a full third of maritime trade that goes through there, about $5.5 trillion. Goes to Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, the Philippines, Malaysia, and certainly China. And that's where China's oil comes from. China is very concerned that's its major security worry is the supply of oil from foreign sources. And so it's always been worried about Malacca, if it can seize control, which it really has in a military sense, of the South China Sea, then it can have some guarantee control over the Strait of Malacca. What has happened, however, is that now these various choke points, which were always recognized and agreed upon as international waterways, none of that is secure anymore after Iran's seizure of the Strait of Hormuz. So this has actually confirmed China's anxiety about the Strait of Malacca. And so we can look forward to there being no compromise whatsoever on its territorial claims over the South China Sea, which is considered by many international studies experts as a flashpoint almost as hot as the Taiwan situation. So this is Iran's seizure of this and Trump's blockade of the Hormuz Straits basically tells all of marine shipping that anything goes. It's not just Russia that might do something or Iran, it's the U.S. We cannot trust the U.S. to make decisions that will be in the best interest of other states. How do we know it's not going to seize the Panama Canal? We don't. I absolutely don't. How do we know that it won't go on and either seize Greenland or build a major military base there to guard what is considered to be another another concern about a marine passage between Iceland and the Nordics. So there's a great deal of uncertainty that the Iran war has brought into the world that is not going to go away anytime soon, and is quite likely to have a key impact on China-West relations. So how does China actually think about energy security? Its view is that it maximizes its own resources. China is increasing or maintaining its total coal use for now, its oil consumption levels, its domestic natural gas. Most of its natural gas is produced domestically. Its hydropower, we don't hear about this very much, but China controls the rivers of Asia, and it's damming them all up. Some of you may have heard of the new hydropower dam that is being built on the Yampo River, or the Brahmaputra River as it's called, in India at 100 gigawatts. I mean, that is 5 times the size of the Three Gorges Dam. A spectacular achievement, but one that is causing significant concern, as you might imagine, in India. Its nuclear power, it has built a fleet of nuclear reactors as the size of France's entire fleet in little more than 15 years, as France did in the 70s after the first oil crisis. And it is very devoted to the solar and wind industry. But China is also planning to decrease its coal use, yes. And it's very much planning to decrease its oil use. That's one of the reasons that is behind its very high-level subsidies to the companies who were building EVs until very recently. China will support an industry like that until it is very successful, and then it'll slowly, well, not slowly, it'll withdraw the subsidies. It will decrease its reliance on natural gas, which it uses mostly for heating, and it will not embrace foreign nuclear technology. For the last 20 years, China has tried all kinds of different reactor designs from the West. And now it has built its own, and it is going to build more of those, and it is going to export them. The whole thing of dependence on foreign suppliers is what China will work to reduce. The more it can rely on its own domestic resources, including renewables, the more self-reliant it will be and the more secure it will be in a very insecure world. This is what has now been made very clear by the Iran war. And China's model, if you will, is being followed by most other countries outside of the OECD. It seems to be the most successful country this way. Its participation in the Iran war, it does participate by giving intelligence on U.S. positions to Iran. It did that earlier. But China looks like, right now, much more of a stabilizer in the world. It's using its strategic reserve. It has reduced its imports of oil, so prices remain lower. China is by far the largest importer of oil worldwide. And it looks to be, completely opposite to the U.S., who started this war as if there was no danger of Iran rejecting its attempt for regime change, and that could withstand the bombing that it got, and that it would close the Strait of Hormuz, something that's been threatening for 40 years. So we come to a series of major points. This is the end of the presentation. One of them is that oil and gas are still essential to the global economy, and this will not change quickly. That's important. Energy resources are weapons of hard power. This is something new. We have seen this in the past. The first energy crisis of 1973 was OPEC, the Arab OPEC countries turning off the spigots of their reservoirs, of their exports, by about 15% of world supply. And that's what made the price go up, not the embargo of the U.S. Oil's a fungible reality. So that was an example of using it as a hard power weapon. The Suez Crisis, where Nasser claimed the Suez Canal, and the British and the French tried to oust him, and then he sank all these boats to clog the Suez that nobody could use. That was another example. The British blockaded Germany in World War I, and the U.S. forbade any exports of jet fuel to the Japanese in 1941 before they attacked. But these were scattered incidents. Now, using oil and gas and critical minerals as hard power weapons is routine. It was, and not just by exporters, but by importers. So the EU used its dependence as a weapon against Russia, and pretty successfully. So this is a sign, I would say, of the collapse of the international order, where states act on their own best interest without concern to the rest of the world. The U.S. has joined Russia as a threat to global energy stability in this sense. The U.S. acts on its own, perhaps on impulse, depending. But it is untrustworthy at this point, just as Russia has been. And then there is a new energy geopolitics, and I will sketch this very simply. The U.S. now is exporting oil and gas mostly to democracies. Japan, South Korea, Europe, Canada, Mexico. Those are the main places. Russia supplies autocracies. So Turkey, India, China, and others that are difficult to trace because a fair bit of Russia's fleet of tankers turn off their location transponders when they deliver. The OPEC used to supply both out of the Persian Gulf, but this may be changing. One of their largest producers, the United Arab Emirates, left the cartel and will now be a competitor to them. And then China supplies Asia, Europe, Latin America with non-carbon technology. Not just solar and wind, but very soon building hydro plants and exporting nuclear technology. So this is a much more complex landscape of energy relations between countries. And I do not see this becoming any simpler anytime soon. The energy transition is real. It is happening. But it is not simple. It is very geopolitical, and China is the pivot. If we are worried about emissions and energy choices, China is where we need to look first. Not only, but definitely first, because its decisions are global decisions. Okay, thank you.
They're working? Yep. Okay, so if we have any questions for Scott, please let me know and I'll bring the microphone around. Any takers?
Thanks, this was fascinating. I'm curious if you, stepping back from this, if from a science and sort of looking to the future perspective, you know, geological hydrogen is not coming anytime soon. Where do you see the opportunities or need greatest in terms of where the U.S. could really invest in research or in technology transfer or that sort of thing, either public or private investment? What kinds of places would we get the most bang for our buck to do better here?
Wow, that's a great question. So this includes all sources?
Anything.
Okay, anything. Just so that I understand that. The U.S. has the best oil and gas extraction technology of anyone. The fact that it's all gone out of Russia now is going to limit their capability in the future. China has adopted a lot of the U.S. technology, but in a fair portion of the rest of the world, they haven't accepted it at this point. It's expensive, and I'm talking about fracking, hydraulic fracturing, multi-stage. They haven't been open to investment in this because of the bad press that it has gotten. But there are a number of countries that could definitely benefit from that if that was the way they wanted to go. The U.S. is also still a key source of new knowledge about energy technologies. Solar is part of that. The NREL, if you know that, the National Renewable Energy Labs that are run, and then our government labs, Oak Ridge, PNNL, Lawrence Livermore, Sandia, Argonne. and the others. These are really important centers of knowledge generation about energy technologies and improved efficiency. We could definitely export a lot of what they do if we weren't too busy savaging their staffs and their researchers. Right now, the U.S. is hamstrung by the White House, by this current administration. If it is cut and destroyed USAID, I do not see this administration funding things that will go to other countries. They are very adverse to that. So we should really be talking about the future beyond that, and boy, that's uncertain. It's a difficult question, but I would say Westinghouse is no longer a U.S. company. It's owned by a Canadian group of investors, very wealthy. But Westinghouse is by far the most advanced nuclear design company. And the U.S. could actually, or Westinghouse could actually be a very important agent for nuclear power, for microreactors, small modular reactors, and large-scale reactors. I can tell from your expression that doesn't satisfy.
I want to let other people have a chance before I monopolize with follow-ups about, well, in the current state of, critical minerals, energy security, and security in general are important. So where could we get them to actually pay for us?
We have good mining companies, but there are good mining companies elsewhere, too.
Any other questions? Well, I was actually going to ask something very similar to what Kate just asked, but to follow up about who will invest in the technologies and resources that will be required for one of your energy transitions. I was struck a couple of years ago by the fact that Aramco held a gigantic invitational conference in Riyadh, I think, to which they invited a lot of mineral industry geologists, exploration geologists in particular, because they announced that they intend to diversify into critical minerals exploration and production. Do you know if other fossil fuel companies are investing any of their windfall profits right now in those directions?
Yes.
In acknowledgement of what's the transition
Great question.
forthcoming?
Yes, the UAE is. Kuwait is not. Iraq is a mess, so it won't. But Iran definitely had interest in that. Probably Qatar is interested in that also. They're a more sophisticated place than they used to be. It makes sense from the point of view of what the UAE has done. The South Koreans built 4 large reactors for them. And the reason they want that, and that they want large solar farms in the desert, is that they don't want to burn up what they export. They don't want to burn up their own natural gas. So they still intend to export that because it's really the source of their economy. But they want to move to non-carbon sources, these other sources that they feel they have kind of a capability to do so that they can save their natural gas for export. And now the Saudis feel the same way about oil and gas. Iran felt that way. That's why it's building more reactors, or Russia's building them. So it makes sense in their calculus to do this. And they are serious about it. They do want to diversify their economies. They just, their system does not allow it to happen easily. I'll put it that way.
All right. So if there are no other questions, let's finish up by thanking Scott again for the last colloquium of the quarter.
this belongs to you.
Yep.
Anything else? I think you got everything.
Got everything I need.
All right. Thank you very much for your help.
Wonderful talk.
Oh, thank you. I hope I didn't depress everybody too much, but
This is one with, I'm not a geologist, I'm a tech person here, so this is one that I actually understood. And the question I have is like all this is going on is like, you know, the petrodollar, and like destabilizing
yeah,
currencies and things like that. There's
Yeah.
just weird stuff going on.
yeah.
Okay. To understand it all, you have to be so talented in a lot of knowledge on economics, energy,
Politics.
and everything. So
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
man of many hats. To
Yeah.
understand it all.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. It's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
All of them in the air.